Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. Very pleased that you could join me. If you found me by accident as you flick channels, take a pause. Maybe it might be worth your while to stay a minute. As ever, if you're watching live, it's Tuesday night at 6 o'clock on the 12th of March. The call-in number here, again, if you're watching on Tuesday, is 640-3091, and usually it should be on the screen. So once again, 640-3091. I'm always happy to hear your comments, pro, anti, or whatever it might be. First of all, let me just tell you that tonight, over at West High School is the freshman open house. It's just starting right now at 6 o'clock. So each of the high schools have had their open nights for incoming, I guess it's the class of 2023. Oh my God, imagine that. The years fly. So anyway, if you have a young man or woman who is about to start high school or will be starting high school in this fall, the fall of 2019, then you've missed the open houses at the other schools, but you can always visit them, and they can usually the people there will be of assistance to you. But tonight is the open house for parents or students entering the West High School next year, and that's from 6 to 8 p.m. And I presume it's right in the library, but I don't know that. Whatever, it's at West High School. So, just on another, and this stuff is actually on the Manchester School District website as well, which is mansd.org. And if you haven't been on there, then if you want to know what's going on in the schools, it's a good place to go. And actually, to that end, an upcoming, let me see if I can find it, an upcoming, of course I won't be able to now that I'm looking for it, the superintendent search. As many of you will be aware, our superintendent, Dr. Bolgan Vargas, will be departing in about a month or so. He finishes up at the end of April, and so the search for his replacement has been initiated. A private company, I believe it was Brady Sullivan, or perhaps it was just Arthur Sullivan himself, but they put up the money, which ranges from $15,000 to $27,500, and I think we should all be grateful that we have generous donors in our city who are willing to put the money up to assist the city in these things. I have to tell you that I frankly think it's embarrassing. Well, first of all, I appreciate the fact that a private citizen or private company would step up, not for the first time, to help the district, but there's also it's also a comment on the state of the city, and particularly the state of the school board's finances, that it has to do that it can't find 15,000 or the 27,000 is not to exceed. That would be, I think, as I understand it, the line item, it's $15,000 for the work, and then up to another 12,500 in potential expenses if actually accrued. But so that's commendable. But the idea that we have to do that is just it just tells you a lot. And there was a school board meeting last night, and I was sitting next to somebody, and school board member Want asked a question quite pointedly and on point. She asked the question, how much money does the school board have in its contingency fund? Rainy day fund, whatever you want to call that. And the answer was 735 or 785. And it turns out that was dollars, not tens of dollars, not hundreds of dollars, not $730,000. It was 700 and whatever the odd number, 735 or something dollars. How embarrassing is that, ladies and gentlemen, in a city the size of Manchester? And when she received the reply, school board member want quipped back. There are some middle schoolers in our school district who probably have more than that in their in a savings account somewhere, and it's funny, but it's also it just tells you where we're at. There were a few telling things at last night's school board meeting, like there always are. But last night was the night when the budget was being discussed, and I'll get back to that in a minute. The superintendent's search then is going on, and there are two meetings planned. One for next Monday night, the 18th of March, and the other one for this a week from tonight. On the 19th. So if I could just find where I had them here a second ago, and then these things get lost. The superintendent search, I found it. So on Monday night, and this would be for people who, if you're interested in meeting, being part of a public forum, where you'd have an opportunity to address the company that's been hired to locate a new superintendent for our school district. And I can't overstate how important it is that we get the right person in. I'm very sad to see Dr. Vargas go, and I had great hopes for his tenure, and I think he did a lot of the right things while I was here, and he certainly was willing to call things out and be an actual manager. Or an executive to run the district. So I am sorry to see him go. As another side point, he will be here next week. He'll be joining me on the 19th on this show. So if you have questions for him and you'd like to call in, please do so. That'll be next Tuesday night at from 6 to 7 o'clock. Dr. Vargas will be with us, and that's. The mayor will be. That'll be the 19th, and then. The following Monday, so almost 2 weeks, 13 nights from tonight, the 25th is when the mayor will be proposing her budget at City Hall, I think at 6 o'clock. Anyway, Dr. Vargas next week, if you'd like to ask him any questions, or if you want to tune in. So next Monday the 18th at Memorial High School, and on Tuesday the 19th at West High School. There are a series of time blocks blocked out for different groups. So, for instance, on Monday the 18th, starting at 3:30 p.m., students can be at Memorial High School from 3:30 to 4:30. The students will have an opportunity to address the search committee, or the search company and committee, who will be gathering information about what the thoughts of the community are. Also, interestingly, and it was done last night, and I'm glad it was done, which was that students who don't have transport to get to that meeting, there will be free transport available for them to, if they're at West or Central, that they'll be able to get public transport, get free transport over to Memorial, so that they can attend that meeting if they wish. So 3:30. Then after that is teachers for the next hour, administration and staff. Then there's another hour in the Chamber of Commerce, and lastly at 7 o'clock aldermen. So for members of the public, if you don't fit into one of those categories, it would be a week from tonight at West High School. On March 19th, starting at 3 p.m. is for principals and vice principals, 4 o'clock support staff, and then 5 o'clock is for parents. So parents are from 5 to 6, Manchester Proud from 6 to 7, and then the general community from 7 on. And there's a note here that, if you come, parents are from 5 to 6, but if you can't make it from 5 to 6 and you're a parent, obviously you're very welcome at 7 o'clock at the general community forum. So that's next Tuesday night. It's important that I hope that this process is open and straightforward. The last time, it's sort of water under the bridge now, but I thought that the process was flawed at the time, because it seemed that it was more secretive than it needed to be. But I have to say that the result, if you were to measure the last search by the people who did it, by the result that they arrived at, then that was commendable. So sometimes, the sausage making may be ugly, but the sausage can taste great. So I think that openness and public scrutiny, etc., is the sort of default position. But so I would like to see that. But in the end, what I'd really like to see is that we get an excellent candidate. That we'll see. We'll see how that ends up being. But we definitely want somebody who's qualified. I think we've made the mistake in the past with some superintendents who, with all the best intentions in the world, Manchester was a reach for them. So bringing in a superintendent like we previously did, whose the total population that they had ever been responsible for previously was a little over 2,000 in a rural small area. And to bring somebody like that in and bring them into the largest city in the state of New Hampshire with its diversity and dynamism and the multifaceted nature of the school district, it's $172 million enterprise with 2,000 employees and other 1,000 of whom or so are teachers. And of course, with 22 buildings and multiple other programs, it's a significant task. And I've addressed this many times about the role we need is the role of somebody who's a CEO as much as anything else. So it's a complex enterprise. It requires serious talent in order to run it, and in order to make the brave decisions that are necessary. Because one will meet resistance, and divining the right course is not simple to begin with. But once one has decided upon it, driving through to completion is not an easy thing for the most accomplished of people. So this job is an exciting job, I think, for the right person. It's certainly not for the lily-livered or faint-hearted. This is a job for. I would like to see somebody who would see the job in Manchester as an opportunity to come into a growing city and match bring the school district to a point where it matches the dynamism of the city itself, because the excitement of what's going on in business, and we could name the names of the companies that are here and the ones that are growing, and lots of small businesses that are growing here, and technology businesses, and the education in terms of colleges and places like SNU and University of Manchester, New Hampshire, and the Art Institute, and so many other things going on. I was reading today in the paper about the ongoing work at the Rex Theatre and the Palace Theatre, and it's an exciting time in Manchester, and there are lots of things going on here that are positive, and the school district needs to match that level of activity and ambition, and we haven't got there. We're nowhere near to there, but we have some people, at least now, in some corners, who are ready to start thinking like that, because for too long we've had people in the city of Manchester who basically just want to hold us back, and it's constant. Every word from their mouth is that that's a lot, or we can't do that, or we have to reduce this, or we have to right size that. And I'm all for right sizing and etc. But also let's do the right thing. So. Again, so Tuesday night next week at West, it would appear to be, if you're a parent, it would appear to be 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. And then Manchester Proud has 6 to 7, and then 7 to 8 p.m. For the general community. Last night at the school board meeting, it was the annual and perennial discussion on the budget for the city of Manchester. Now, in some senses, because the CPI, Consumer Price Index, has been a little higher than it was in during the recession years, when we were almost in negative growth. the number is somewhere around the 2%, 2.1 or 2.03 or somewhere in that nature, is what the CPI number is, and so there's so the tax cap number will be around somewhere. I think it's 172, if I have it right here. Let me just see. Yeah, so yeah, 172 million dollars would be the tax cap number. Now, I think it's important to note that when you're looking at the budget in Manchester, that $172 million, of that total number, the amount that's actually raised from local taxes is, let me see, 84,211,450. So the 172 is a lot of money, but 84 of that is from local taxes. To put this, another thing, just to throw some out there, to kind of throw some stuff against the wall and see what sticks. There are a couple of other numbers in here out of that annual budget that people should look at. Obviously, first of all, the majority of the money is for salaries and employee benefits, and that amount is 82 million in salaries and 41 million in employee benefits. So 123 out of the 172 is for, but that's just how it is, right? That's the nature of the nature of the whole job is, you need teachers in front of people. You're in the teaching business, in the educational business. That's just how it is. If you were running a cleaning service like Minute Maids, or I see these vans driving by of people who clean houses. If you're in the house cleaning business, then I think it's easy to assume that 90% of if you have 100 employees working, after you pay for their gasoline to drive in their van or car from house to house, throw a number at that, and then the majority of your expenditures, other than the cleaning cloths and the cleaning materials you might buy, the majority of your expenses every year are going to be your employees' salaries and benefits and insurance for them. So the people who I hear talking about education budgets and saying, the money's just going to the teachers, and frankly, it's just a nonsense. I mean, if that's not a serious conversation to have with anybody, because it's a bit like talking to the cleaning company and saying, if Manchester was running a cleaning service and it had 100 cleaners instead of 1,000 teachers, you'd have people saying, how come every time we give more money to the cleaning department that it goes to salaries and benefits? Well, I don't know. If you're as dumb as whatever and you live under a rock, then yeah, that's a surprise to you. If you're a normal, rational human being and know the first thing, you don't have to know anything about business. You could be whatever you might be. Any rational person looking at education says to themselves, we have facilities, we have technology, and then we have personnel and transportation. But some of the numbers that I think are important to look at this when people talk about the money that we spend, etc. $11.5 million of that money is for debt service. So there's $1 million a month going out from Manchester to pay previous debts from on the school side. That's just not the whole city, right? That's just on the school side. So of the $82 million that's collected from the local taxpayers, 11.5 of it is for debt service. There's another big number here that would surprise you, which is I was going to grab it here. Where is it? Yeah. So city services, $9.6 million. Now, city services has always been an interesting one in Manchester because, the total budget is 172. $82 million of that is collected from local taxpayers. Of that 82, a proportional part of it, but that 82 from local taxpayers, 11.5 million, nearly $1 million a month in debt service. And then another almost 10 million, $9.5 million for city services. So when you look on the state website and you do a comparative analysis of where Manchester is compared to other school districts, and you find my old mantra that you're all tired of hearing, but that doesn't mean it's not as true as it was the first time I said it, that Manchester spends less per student than any other city in the state of New Hampshire, any other town, any other school district, anywhere. I'm not playing with words. We are the cheapest. But what that doesn't account for sometimes is that we have a thing called chargebacks. So I used to joke about the mayor's office, for instance, that if you want to just be ridiculous to make a point a minute, that the mayor's office has a budget. There are no city services taken out of the mayor's office because when the parking spot for the mayor's car outside of City Hall isn't billed separately to the mayor's office, like, oh, there's, $20 a snowstorm to clear off that must be taken out of the budget. No, it's done by the city. The same goes for other parts of city government. But no. When it comes to the schools, it's a little different. When it comes to the schools, and the city goes in and it plows the parking lot at Goslar, or it clears the snow on the pathway going into Parker Varney, that gets billed to the school district. That's coming out on the school district side. Now, we already in Manchester, if you look at a pie chart of spending for city services, the majority of the spending, a slight majority, but a majority of the spending goes on the city side, and then the schools. And if you compare that division to any other city in the state of New Hampshire, you'll find that anywhere else that schools and education generally are the largest part of the budget in any city, but not in Manchester. So not alone do we do that, but then we have the things like, say, chargebacks. So you take the annual expenditure and the per capita expenditure on students, and now you have $9.5 million more that's being charged back to go back to the city side. So you really could take that $9.5 million, take it off the school side of the spending, and put it back over on the city side, because there are cities that don't do chargebacks. Now, there is a reason this isn't all skullduggery and trickery, much as some of us, the cynics amongst us, like to think that sometimes, but there was a reason for it back in the day, that when we had contributing towns, then the idea was that we had Bedford sending all its high school students to West, and we had Auburn and Hooksett and Candia. And so the idea was that why should we, the taxpayers of Manchester, be paying for all of it when we actually are, we're going to put it in on the tuition cost for students coming in from outside. Sadly, those days are gone. We don't have students, pretty much, very few, if any, students coming in now. But the idea was to sort of load the cost on so that it was properly reflective of the full cost of the city. Today it makes a lot less sense, because today, the city is all it's as Mayor Gatsis used to say, we're a city of one, and that's true, except for when it comes to the schools. When we're not a city of two, we're a city of 1.5. The half being the schools. So when you look at these numbers, you look at $82 million or $84 million coming from local taxes. You have those two big numbers coming out of there. But anyway, so last night, what happened? The usual conversation has to do with the tax cap and the tax cap budget. And this is an old saga that I don't want to waste your time with tonight, and I've probably done it too often before. But according to some, it is necessary for the school board to submit a tax cap budget. As you know, we have a tax cap in Manchester, a very restrictive one, and one of the big problems with it is it doesn't allow us to recognize revenue. So, just to highlight that, if there were ever a benefactor who, some mega millionaire who was to decide to donate $10 million to Manchester, what that would actually do is Manchester wouldn't have one extra dollar to spend at the end of the year. We wouldn't have what we had and $10 million more. No, because we've got a spending cap. So if the spending in the city was, 200 million for last year, and someone gave a donation of $10 million, just all that would happen is the taxes would go down to 190, and the $10 million would be used for the services. And so when we have great years like last year and the year before, I think we had an additional more than $2 million come in car tax revenues. And you would think to yourself, well, this is great. Let's get that off the back of the taxpayers. We should be able to, now we have an additional $2 million. Well, just on the school side, for instance, not that it should all just go to schools. There are other expenditures. But on the school side, let's say you said of the $2.5 million extra in car revenue, the city, a normal city, without the spending tax cap, which is just ridiculous, but that's my opinion, you would say, let's take $1 million of it, and $1 million is roughly 20 teachers. So you'd say, hey, we've got the largest class sizes in the state of New Hampshire, again. So let's go out and hire 20 teachers. Let's take $1 million of the extra money that came in this year, and it came in multiple years now. But no, we can't do that. So the tax cap is constraining our ability to respond to the needs of the city. So last night at the school board meeting, there was a debate about this issue of the tax cap, sending a tax cap budget. And actually, to be honest, last night they didn't spend too much time on the issue of whether there needed to be a tax cap budget or not, because the current mayor and school board has swallowed whole the idea that that's how it is, that the school board must submit a tax cap budget. I don't want to fight old battles, but just so that it's not lost to community memory, it's important to note that on 2 occasions in the past, and there weren't 4 occasions, and I'm just picking 2. There were only 2 times since the tax cap came in 6 or 8 years ago. On 2 occasions, the school board in Manchester took taxpayers' money and paid an attorney to go and research the thing and come back to it and tell that board whether they were compelled under the tax cap to bring in a tax cap budget, or whether that just applied to the city side and that the schools the education committee could submit a budget of their actual needs, and then it would be up to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, who in the end are the tax raising authority, to decide how to deal with that. But no, despite the fact that public money was spent on 2 legal opinions over a couple of years, both of which came back and said the school board does not need to meet the tax cap number. The school board can submit a budget which is the actual needs, what the school district needs to run the schools in the city. On both occasions, that advice was ignored. And the city solicitor, who's no longer with us, the city solicitor at the time, when asked by the mayor in the corner office, came up with the solution, with the answer that those legal opinions were incorrect, that actually the school board could not do that. That was very convenient, and it's a bit like a student marking their own paper, having some employee, cornered to give an answer. But however, so I don't want to prolong that. Just that the fact is there's debate about whether they're required to do it or not. But they did do it, so they came up with the tax cap budget, and then this was this $172 million. And so then the question became, well, what do we actually need to run the schools? Because we have 6 different groups of employees, all the groups. So the largest of which is teachers, of course, but secretaries, paraprofessionals, administrators, principals and assistant principals. There are different groups, and each of those groups, they're all out of contract. The teachers haven't had a contract for a year, and so they're sitting there. Effectively, they have taken a pay cut for the last year in real terms. And so the question was asked, how are we going to manage this, since that's not included in the budget? Let me grab this call. Good evening, caller.
Hey, Jim, how are you?
I'm good. Who's this?
This is Eddie.
Hi, Eddie. How are you?
Good.
What's going on?
Hey, Jim, I just wanted to ask you something. I'm just tuning in now to your show, right?
Right.
But I wanted to ask if you have any input in reference to state funding. I know you often advocate for more funding for Manchester City schools, right?
Right.
Do you have any input as far as, like, for example, Claremont education funding lawsuit is back in the news. I don't know if
Right.
you're aware of that.
It is. Yeah.
They're talking about a Claremont 3 now.
Well, it's not been action. There's talk about it. There's no action on it now. But
Right.
yeah.
Right. There's no actual concrete action on Claremont 3, but they're discussing it. It's back in the news because Dover filed the lawsuit and they got the limits on the adequacy grant on the number of people. So like Bedford's getting more money now from the state. Okay.
Right.
So, I mean, do you have any input on the role of the state of New Hampshire as far as the education funding goes?
I do. Yeah, I'd be. I'm glad you asked me that because I thank you for calling again, Ed. And the last time you asked me something on the city side, and I wasn't trying to flub it, but as I said to you, it's not like I'm not like on top. But this is something I do know a little bit about, and so it's a pretty fluid situation right now because as you know, there are lots of bills at various stages of development or in committee in Concord. But the feeling generally is that there's going to be a net benefit to the city of Manchester from some of these bills that they're likely to pass, and so which ones are successful and which ones are not. So one of the things that's likely to happen that will affect us in this next school year is to the extent of $500,000, which will stop the next proposed reduction in adequacy grants. As you know, adequacy grants, or you may know, adequacy grants, which were state funding to a part of state funding to local districts, was being reduced by an amount every year over a period of whatever, like 10 years or something. And it's been going on and on and on. And so the current, the new administration, or at least the new House and Senate, have passed a bill that would eliminate what was proposed to be the next cut. So we're going to have a benefit of. I saw the number that for Manchester it'll be a net $500,000 for Manchester in this upcoming year, this immediate year. So that's going to affect this coming budget. The other thing.
Let me ask you this, Jim. Should the state even be involved, or should it just be each community handle their own affairs?
Oh, no, not at all. No, absolutely not. The state should be way more involved than it is, and it should rely much less on local communities. There's because there's such a need.
When we talk about these adequacy grants, a lot of the money from the adequacy grants is coming from the communities.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. In the case
of
it's. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. In the case of taxes, like the
some
state,
communities get more, some get less than what they're putting in.
That's right. And so, but to answer your question, and so in the city of Manchester, for instance, 20 million, the city is getting 20 million in state taxes, which is actually raised locally. So it's really another local tax. So when I say the local tax is 84 million, there's another 20,000 of state taxes, which is Manchester raised. But 20 million. Did I say 20,000? 20 million. So no. But if I could wave a magic wand, right? I would shift it all. The idea that taxpayers in Manchester are being asked to finance the education in Manchester, as opposed when you look at the state, the issues in the state. It's just like many other issues in our state, right? The Manchester has the highest level of needs in the state of New Hampshire, and there isn't a magic line. I've railed for years about this idea, and I've got friends in all these towns, but there's no. If you drive out to Hookshead, there's no big, as you know, no big red line across the street by the top of the mobile station at Exit 9 that says you just crossed over into a new world, right?
Yeah.
You go to Litchfield, the same thing. You go to all over, right? So just because a house is on one side of Boynton Street as opposed to another, right? It makes no sense that there's such disparities there. And when we have issues in this, I don't want to go off into non-school issues because it happens in school issues too. But the Manchester School District ends up carrying water for all the surrounding communities, and actually it's the engine of growth. It is the biggest employer in the state of New Hampshire. This is the largest economic area in the state of New Hampshire. Close closely followed nowadays by Portsmouth, but still, it's Manchester is the economic engine for the state of New Hampshire. And so all the people who live in all the surrounding towns, and going out further, out into places like Windham, and you can go a lot further than the contiguous towns, they all benefit by the fact that there's this humming engine of economic development and energy humming away here in the centre of the southern part of the state. And so to go out into your, nice house in suburbia and say, I'm going to put, $25,000 a year into my kids' education out here, while the kids of Manchester have 11.5. It just isn't right.
I think the idea goes something like this, Jim. If you have a prosperous town, right?
Right.
Should they have to pay for the sins of the town that's not as prosperous? Because a lot of the towns that are not as prosperous, it's because of the decisions that they made.
I don't believe that's true though. Like that's not true anywhere. It's certainly not true here. And the idea of, I don't want to argue with you, but the idea of the sins of the community. It's not the sins of the community. It's a matter of the. It's one
way of putting it.
Yeah.
The mistakes, the poor judgment.
No, that's not true at all. That's not true at all. That's just not true. The fact is that in such a system as you described, this is not based on merit. That would have you believe that the person who lives in the $1 million house in Bedford has somehow made better economic decisions and has been smarter or has worked harder and got up earlier in the morning, and therefore they've earned that money and they've earned the right to have their kids.
Oh yeah.
But that's not the case. So
the money didn't just fall from the sky.
Well, you live in the. I don't want to get into this too, but you live in a place where inherited money and money that has been handed on, etc. is. I'm not saying everybody. I'm a merit guy. I love market forces, and what I love about America and why I love living here, and I've been here 27 years. And the reason
free market enterprise.
I love free market enterprise. I like the idea that I work harder, I get paid more. I like that, and if I try harder, I do better. But I absolutely disagree with this idea that it's a meritocracy, because in actual fact, if you want to deal with real science and numbers, the country in the Western world today where people are least mobile between one economic level or socioeconomic level and another is the United States of America. So people grew up.
That ain't true at all. Well, it's a land of opportunity.
You can say that, and that's what we all grew up on. It certainly was a land of opportunity after the GI Bill in the 1950s and 60s, and we saw rapid expansion of the middle class, and it was a meritocracy then. And absolutely it was true in the 19th and early 20th century that the only place in the world probably you could come and you didn't have to deal with aristocracy and embedded money, etc., was the United States. It was the land of opportunity and the land of the free. And it's still a land of opportunity and the land of the free, but it is the Western democracy which has the least mobile people between various stratas of society. So we're closer now to where people were 200 years ago than we are. And there's science behind that. I'm not just making that up, and there's lots of people listening, I hope, who can go and check it. That's actually a fact, and I can't quote the studies right now, but there are many of them that show that. So, but we've gone a long way off from education in my worldview. And not just my worldview, but the Constitution of the state of New Hampshire envisages and requires that the state fund an adequate education for the children of the state. This is a battle and a war that was won a long time ago, and so it's required to do it, and it should be doing it. And everybody, I think, should be agreed that the state has been failing in its requirement to do that for a long time. But Ed, I appreciate the call. It's always interesting, and I appreciate your view. Thanks, Ed.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Anyway, that's Ed, who was going to always keep me on my toes, and I appreciate that. But so Andrew Volinsky, who was he's an executive counselor and one of the attorneys who took the both Claremont decisions, Claremont 1 and 2. I've talked to him about coming on this show. He's been going around the state, and they've been holding open forums to talk about state funding. And actually, Ed was at one which I was at as well, at Memorial High School a couple of months ago. If I remember correctly, he was there, I think, yes. And or perhaps not, might have been Manchester Pro one. Sorry if I got that wrong. But anyway, there was they've done. They're basically explaining how the unfairness and the inequities in education funding in the state of New Hampshire, and so that continues, and there is some discussion going on about how education funding might change in our state. But there's a battle royal that goes on here, and these things don't happen in isolation. And I remember when the Bill O'Brien led regime wasn't kind. I don't mean to malign him. I just, he's the sort of poster child in my world for somebody who goes in and catastrophically cuts public services and let the lights fires everywhere, in my opinion, and just walks out and leaves the mess behind. And that's the nature of how at that time I remember there were 43 bills that were under consideration in Concord under the bill under the most recent, which is now 5 years ago, I think, Bill O'Brien ascendancy. 43 bills attacking public education in one form or another. And one of those was because the state constitution in New Hampshire requires that the state of New Hampshire fund an adequate education for the students of the state. Now, it hasn't done that in a long time, and it's it's the only state or one of two states that doesn't contribute to funding public school buildings. And so anywhere else you would go, if you were building a new school or building an extension or whatever, then the state that you're in chips in and pays a percentage, be that 50%, 80%, 20%, whatever it may be, not in the state of New Hampshire. I had a little note here when it comes to state education spending that UNH, I saw in the paper yesterday that University of New Hampshire, their applications for places are lower than previous than they had previously, and the school is saying that that's part of a trend, a statewide trend reflecting the lower number of kids graduating high school, etc. And there's some truth in that, but it's also true that the most expensive public education system in the United States of America is here in the state of New Hampshire. UNH has been level funded. They haven't had an extra dime for 7 years, so they've been eating themselves in chewing up pieces, laying people off, reducing offerings, etc. I have a son there right now, in full disclosure, and my wife went there, and it's a great school, and they do great things, and I have nothing bad to say about it, but I accept to say that it's the most expensive public university in the United States of America, and therefore it is no surprise that students in New Hampshire have the highest level of college debt upon graduation of any other student in any other state. And that's just shocking, given that we're in New Hampshire, which is depending on how you count it, the sixth, seventh richest state in the Union in terms of per capita income. It's taken me off of the local budget a little bit, but I have to say that I try not to stray into national politics too much because I like to respect my audience, and I know I have some people who watch regularly who are from all different political viewpoints, and I make no apologies for the fact that my views are whatever let's call them non-conservative, because I never know what label to put on them. I'm not a card-carrying member of any party, but in any case, but I want to stray in there today because it goes back to my friends in Manchester who would talk about, let's say, unfunded mandates, particularly when it comes to special education. And special education is a huge number in the city of Manchester. I don't know if it's spelled out on this one I have here, but special ed. Let me see. It's not. it's not clear right here. I'm sorry, and I don't want to spend too much time looking for it. But special education is a significant cost, and I have no problem with that. Every dime spent in it is money well spent, and our problem is that the proposal is to spend an additional $1.5 million next year, and that's sorely needed because Manchester has been underfunding special education for a long time. But President Trump announced his budget for the next fiscal year this week, and now for the third year in a row, he's proposing reduction in funding for the Department of Education, and it strikes me as, I can understand. I don't agree. I think it's crazy, but for instance. The budget proposes a 31% decrease in the Environmental Protection Agency, because God forbid we should actually have clean water to drink and clean air to breathe. So he was quoted in the New York Times from a speech that President Trump had made a couple of years ago. He said that he was going to reduce the EPA to tiddlywinks or something, to anyway reduce it down to nothing. So, I don't agree with it. I think it's ridiculous. But a 31% decrease in the EPA is one thing. But a 12% decrease in the funding for the Department of Education. The third set of decreases in the 3 years. It makes no sense at all, and I honestly do not understand my so-called, or my friends who would say they're fiscal conservatives, and so we have a federal spending going out, just gone absolutely crazy, and it sometimes bugs me. I try to be a pleasant person, and I'm kind of a positive person, and when I'm not here in front of you, I like to try and look at things with the glass half full rather than the glass half empty, and I try not to dwell on things. But when I think back at the battles that I've had over the years with people who said, despite looking at the need, and when you win the battle, the conversation, and you have the debate, and the science is pulled out, and you're sitting with somebody you have an opportunity to discuss it with, and it's right in front of them, and they can see that it's unjust, that it needs to be fixed, that we haven't been doing the right thing, that it's underfunded, and then the card comes out. Fiscal responsibility. We can't afford it. We've got to control debt and spending. We can't do it. Okay, so I wasted all night explaining to you, Mr. or Mrs. X, that your approach was wrong and that actually I was correct, or that the facts were that these programs were underfunded. And when we got to the end of it, you saved even though you've won, you're still losing because here's the red card. Boom. We're not doing it because fiscal responsibility, we can't be handing that on to our grandchildren. And now we're handing on everything to our grandchildren, like it's going out of fashion. We have the largest budget ever created, $4.9 something trillion. I'm all for the U.S. military, but giving them more money than they actually asked for, and don't forget $8.5 billion more on top of what we're taking from building U.S. military bases and maintenance and housing for the U.S. military. We're taking that money to build a wall that nobody wants. But we're taking another $8.3 billion to build a wall. And so the people in Manchester understand what that actually means. And I'm sorry if I'm being too political for some. But what that actually means is, because what's being proposed, and you can go and look up the budget proposed this week for the Department of Education. And of the many cuts that are there, one of them is, for instance, right here in the 21st Century program to be eliminated. Well, probably the most successful program for kids in need of services and here in Manchester is the Bring It program at Hillside and now also at Parkside. It's on 2 nights a week in each one, and they've had great success for about 12 years now. And it's partially funded by 21st Century. These would be programs for the most needy kids in our city. Not always the needy ones. There's some great kids. They're not all like needy kids who are there, but there are some of those kids who are there who are needy. Help with homework, help with with other programs, and they have a wonderful time. The 21st Century program pays for a bus to pick kids up on the west side 2 nights a week and bring them over to Hillside so they can play sports or do different things. There's a nursing thing that goes there. There's a singing and dance program. There's all kinds of stuff. But anyway, we're going to eliminate that, right? So you're supporting reducing federal education money, and one of the things you're going to cut is the money for the Bring It program in Manchester. And all the other programs across the 50 states of the United States of America, all the cities and towns, a lot bigger, many of them a lot bigger with a lot larger needs than the city of Manchester. And that's where the billionaires amongst us want to make the cut. That's where the guy who goes to the bathroom on a gold 24-karat gold toilet in New York that's where he wants to take the money from. And then, for anybody, I don't know where your kids are right now in along the spectrum of going to school, whether they're ready to go to kindergarten or they're in elementary school or middle school or high school. Hopefully many of them will end up wanting to go to college. And if they go to college, federal funding to assist the people with college has been flat funded or has had reduction in funding now for years. So it's a small piece compared to what the actual cost of college is. Because of that, we have the largest amount of debt after mortgages today in the United States is student debt, and it's growing faster, and soon it will be the single largest amount of debt carried by every citizen or many citizens of the great United States of America. They're going to walk around with this huge number on their backs, and it affects our society, and it affects their decisions, and it affects communities and how they grow, and whether people can afford to buy housing, and when they can afford to get married, and all those things, and how young they're able to be, or how old they have to wait and they can have children, etc. All those things are affected by these massive debts. In the face of that, President Trump proposes eliminating the subsidized loans for students going to university. And so if we were to eliminating the loan. Now, those loans today are usually something in the order of $2,500, between $2,500 and $5,000, depends on which loan, how you're doing. But that's the ballpark of where they are, and they're subsidized loans. It's not like it's free money. You have to pay it back because student loans stay with you forever. You can go bankrupt, you still have your student loans. So it's not like the government's not made whole. But again, we're privatizing that too, by the way. Just let's not get into the weeds on this, but all the government is doing through these programs is saying that we'll actually give you a loan that will assist you with your college tuition, and that even though the interest will accrue every year for the 4 years you're in college, you won't have to start making payments until you're 6 months out of school, and then you'll pay a percentage of your salary for the next 10 or 15 years to pay off that amount. And oh, by the way, we'll charge you a lower rate than you would get charged if you went into your local bank. So that's a proposal to eliminate that program. I'm baffled. I sit here thinking, how is that? We're in an economy where we compete, as I say often. We're in competition with the whole world, not just Canada and Mexico, but Brazil and Germany and Japan and Korea and Australia and Britain and France and any place else you want to name. It's a global economy. We have kids going out into the world who are not going to be competing anymore with the kid from 2 blocks down or 1 house over or 3 towns away. But in the end, they're competing with young men and women coming out of colleges and universities and schools all across the world. And this. Here is when we had the call about local people paying for it locally, etc. Here's the result of it: when you support the cutting of programs like this at the federal level, it first of all, it's just asinine. It can't be justified. There's no logic behind it, other than this tramp in march step over the edge of a cliff in the face of some ideological madness about self-determination and individualism and all that. It's just ridiculous. So to see those when I saw that budget today, and I look at the Betsy DeVos, the Federal Secretary of Education, and the proposal to reduce spending by 12%. You'll see a different number because there's a couple of numbers in there. One is it says $7.1 billion, which is 10% of the federal education budget, but actually the total cuts are $12 million, which is 12%. But just in case anybody's go into the weeds, and you'll find it in there. But it just makes no sense whatsoever that we do that. And the last I want to say about this, because it just gets me agitated, it might get you agitated too. But when I look at the spending, the $5 billion or $6 billion that's being taken from, most of it from the U.S. military building program right now to build a wall, and then the proposal right now to put another $8.3 billion in there, which gets you to about $14 million. And most economists claim that the cost of building the wall that President Trump proposes is somewhere between $25 and $50 billion. So get your head around that. And when you look at monies like that, can you imagine? You don't need $1 billion in the state of New Hampshire to transform the nature of the future of every kid in the state, their future lives and their ambitions, and what the classrooms they would have, and the schools they would have, and the amount of individual attention they could get, and teachers who could, some kid who's struggling and week 3 of his second year in elementary school, and there's a program there, and someone says little Johnny's falling behind, and there's a remedial teacher who's able to step in and give him some one-on-one time, and there's a program after school for him, and all in. Can you just imagine that? And instead of that, we have a federal budget that is hammering public education. Oh, by the way, as part of this downfunding of public education, and while that reduction of 12% is happening in the Federal Department of Education, what's being added is I think it's I had the number. I think it's $500 million in a new federal voucher program. And then we have, what I love is this program that's going to allow, it's like the Mr. Edelblut in New Hampshire, the Secretary of Education in New Hampshire, looking at the Learn Anywhere program. And then when I heard that over the last couple of months, and then I look at President Trump's budget this week, and I see a different wording but the same thing. So this would now take federal education money, but if I'm pick any trade you want, or any, I don't mean trades literally, but any business you want. It reminds me of when a previous mayor was talking about training our kids to work for Aramark, so they'd learn how to clean down counters and bus tables. But under the Trump administration, led by him and then Ms. DeVos, the Secretary of Education, and enabled by people like Mr. Edelblut in the state of New Hampshire, we'd take public funding, your taxes and mine, and we'd take it and we'd hand it out now. Instead of it going into colleges and trade schools and community colleges and high schools and grade schools, we'll take a big piece of that money and we'll allow private companies to apply for it. And so now Aramark, not that I want to be anti-Aramark, but you can have kids trained in how to sweep the floors in the schools properly, and they learn how to operate machinery. Yeah, the carpet cleaning machine. They learn how to show up for work on time in their nice uniform that they wear, and they're shown how to find their way from one side of the building to the other, so they can get the recycles in the recycle bins in time. But now we're going to take money out of actual teachers and schools and give it to private companies and call it Learn Anywhere. So sorry to gone off on that. We'll get back to the budget next week. We will have Dr. Vargas with us, and I'm looking forward to that. He'll be gone in 5 or 6 weeks. I'm grateful for him for coming on. Thank you to Ed for the call, and keep an eye out, folks. A week from now, the 25th of March, or a week and a half, closer to 2 weeks, Mayor Craig will be issuing her budget on March 25th. Thank you for being with me tonight. I appreciate it. Remember, St. Patrick's Day is coming up next Sunday. And the parade is on the last Sunday of the month, on the 31st. But happy St. Patrick's Day, and we'll see you next week. Good night.